Greetings. I'm Deacon Jeff, and it is July 30th. July 30th, hard to believe. Here we are right in the heart of summer. And these hot summer days, these long, warm summer evenings where it stays late till 9 o'clock at night, I can't help but think about being a kid, growing up in Northwest Ohio. It was very flat, very, very flat. Sound traveled a long way. And as a kid, I used to hang out with my group of friends in the neighborhood. There were about six of us. We'd spend these great summer days swimming and fishing and throwing the ball around, playing frisbee, playing wiffle ball in the back lot, or hanging out in a friend's treehouse, going out on the swing set or on the rope swings from the treehouse. But we all knew at some point in the day we were going to get the call. The parents back home or the older siblings saying it's time to get home, either for dinner or going out for a family outing or whatever. But it was interesting because you see, me and my group of friends, the call for each of us was different. And none of us got called by words. One of my friend's dads had this big steel pipe, and he used to bang on it with a wooden hammer when he wanted the kids to come home, and it would clang, clang, clang. Another one of the moms had this big brass horn, kind of in a turn, and it had a big black rubber ball on the bottom that you would squeeze. And she'd put it between her legs and give it a good hard squeeze and go, honk! And when they heard that honk, they knew it was time to get home. One family had a big bell hanging out off their front light. And when it was time for the kids, they'd go out and gong the bell. And my dad had a unique way of calling me and my brother. See, my dad was one of those guys who was able to put a couple fingers in his mouth and let out this incredibly loud, piercing whistle, a talent I was never able to master. And when we would each hear our call, we knew that it was time to respond, either yell, coming, or just get ourselves home. Because we knew if we failed to respond properly, sooner or later, we were going to get the talking, the lecture. All the long words from the parent or from the older sibling telling us why it's important that we respond. And, the reality is we pretty much tune them out. Because even though there's probably an important lesson in what they're telling us, nobody likes the lecture, especially from someone you know well. It's funny how, as kids, when we would get caught in some mischief by a neighbor or somebody else's parents and get scolded, that would make an impression. We'd pay attention to that. We had this skill to tune out our own parents, our own older siblings, even though those important lessons that they were trying to get across to us were intended to keep us safe from the consequences of our own stupid decisions sometimes, keep us safe from danger. But of course, after whatever we got called home for was done after dinner, we'd all go back out again because the nights were long and we'd pick up right where we left off, swinging or throwing the frisbee around or whatever, until it got dark. And the way we knew it was time to get in at night when it was getting dark was the street lights would come on. And we knew that once the darkness came, we wanted to be in a safe place. We wanted to be back home with those who loved us. It's always been true that nobody likes a lecture, especially from someone that they know too well. They say familiarity breeds contempt. And we see that in our gospel today. Jesus has returned to his hometown, and we find him preaching in the synagogue, preaching great words, wonderful lessons, things that are intended to keep people safe, to give them salvation, ultimate safety. But the people aren't having any of it. They've got no patience for him. They're saying, who is this guy? We know this guy. This is the kid that grew up in our neighborhood. Who does he think he is? And it's too bad. Because the fact that they're tuning him out, just like kids tune out their parents, nobody likes the lecture, means they're going to miss out. They're going to miss out on these important lessons that are intended to save them from the consequences of their own stupid actions. But there's a lesson in that too. for us, a lesson that in fact was obviously learned very well by our saint of the day. Today is the feast day of St. John Chrysologus. That means golden word. St. John was known as being a great preacher, so much so that he's been named a doctor of the church, only about 3 dozen of those in history. But he was made a doctor of the church, not because he enunciated some new earth shattering theological concepts. He wasn't made a doctor of the church for what he said. He was made a doctor of the church for how he said it. You see, he was known for giving concise, brief homilies on well established teachings of the church. Now, don't get too excited about the brief thing, because you see, back in his day, some of the great saints, like Augustine, like Athanasius, were known for giving homilies at Mass that would go 2, 3, 4 hours long. One wonders if they would have survived after Mass long enough to be named a saint if they were around today. But St. John, it is said, was concerned about tiring the ears of his listeners. So his homilies rarely went over 15 minutes. Probably about what we have now today at Mass. It's also said that St. Francis of Assisi shared this concern. Often we hear that there's a quote attributed to St. Francis of Assisi to preach the gospel always, and when necessary, use words. Guess what? He never said that. And he probably never would have said that because he preached with words all the time. But nonetheless, the intent behind that little adage has value. That we've got to be careful not to tire people with lectures, because everyone is called to hear the word of Christ, but nobody wants a lecture. So sometimes we might need to get people's attention with a clang or a gong or a honk or a whistle, or maybe, just maybe, by our lived example. The way that we live our lives, different from everybody else, shockingly, at least it's supposed to be, as Catholic Christians. So, for each of us, we shouldn't shy away from those important lessons that we can learn from preaching of those spiritual leaders in our lives. Otherwise, we're going to end up like those poor people in Nazareth who missed out on those important lessons that Jesus intended to save them from the consequences of their own stupid actions. Those same kind of lessons that our parents and our older siblings tried to get across to us, that we would tune out. But on the other hand, even though we know those lessons are meant to keep us safe from the consequences of our own actions, our own sins, we also need to know that not everybody's going to listen. So sometimes we need to be the call to others around us by our words, but probably more importantly, by our lived examples, because you may just end up being the person who keeps someone else from suffering the eternal consequences of their own bad actions. Because, like it or not, for each of us, at some point, streetlights are going to come on. And we all want to be in a safe place when the darkness comes. Don't be afraid to be the call. Have a blessed day.